Claire Bernal and Rana Faruqui were two women about to embark on exciting stages in their lives. Claire was leaving the familiarity of her hometown behind for a new job and life in London.
Out to prove that she could be independent, but not worldly wise at all.
Rana Faruqui had decided it was time to settle down, to marry and have children.
She was 35 and she thought her biological clock was ticking, and you know, there was a lot of things going on in her life at that time.
Both women were to be murdered by one-time boyfriends who became the kind of stalker who kills. Claire Bernal grew up in Tunbridge Wells, a quiet market town in the south of England. Hers was a close family, and she was much loved.
She was very beautiful, not only outside but inside as well, and very trusting. She always saw the good in people. She had a kindness about her and she hated injustice.
She was kind, she was gentle, she was very beautiful, very loving.
And at 21, recently qualified as a beautician, Claire wanted to branch out.
Very shy, lacking in confidence, out to prove that she could be independent, but not worldly wise at all. I think in a lot of ways Claire had a rosy view of life.
Rana Faruqui was a professional woman in her 30s, the middle child of 3. Rana lived alone in Maidenhead, not far from the family home. She was an enthusiastic horsewoman and spent most of her spare time with her horse, Toby.
Go on, Toby. Go on, Tobes. Go on, Toby.
Her life was with the horse. We all knew that Toby was top of the list, and then we all came down.
She was quite combative, didn't suffer fools gladly, but also intensely loyal.
She was my friend as well as my daughter. She had such a good sense of humour. She was so loyal, she was very kind, and on the other hand she could be an absolute madam.
In October 2001, Rana's father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. An episode was about to begin, which was to change her outlook on life.
He died in April 2002. I suppose Rana and I, we were very close, or probably more close, you know, sort of during that time. I think she was very worried, obviously, about her father and worried about me.
His illness and subsequent death had a huge impact on all of the family, but particularly Rana. They'd been very close.
Rana was his little princess. He adored her, and she adored her dad. And it really knocked her sideways.
After Claire Bernal left home, she got a job in London, eventually working on the beauty counter of Harvey Nichols. It was just where and what she wanted.
Claire was very proud of living in London, and she wanted to show me the places that she'd been to, and she grew up very fast that year.
One of her colleagues at Harvey Nichols was a man called Michael Pech.
Claire told me she started dating a security officer, and that was in the January. She said to me that he was quiet, very quiet, and he would come and talk to her on the counter, and he would say nice things to her. You know, he was very complimentary and made her feel good about herself.
Pech had grown up in Bratislava. He was known to his family as something of a mother's boy. Early on, Pech decided on a career in the military and graduated from a prestigious academy in his native Slovakia. Like many of his generation, Pech decided he'd head for Britain to learn English and earn money. He moved to London in summer of 2004 and got the job as a security guard at Harvey Nichols shortly after. He was then to meet Claire Bernal. Claire dated Pech for 3 weeks before he went home to visit his family. Letters between them betrayed an intensity.
It was at that point I really quizzed Claire, and because she'd seen him off at the airport. And And she said, oh, well, I've got a photograph of him. And I looked at it and I said, oh, Clay, he's got really hard eyes. And she said, oh, yes, that's something that my flatmate had also pointed out. And I said, well, is there anything that you dislike about him? And she said, well, he is quite possessive. And you know, it concerns me a bit. And it was just really a mother and daughter chat. I didn't like the sound of him, but I felt that Claire was in control of the situation. She wasn't falling for him hook, line and sinker, so I assumed it would take its own course.
Rana Faruqui, who'd been very shaken up by her father's death, was keen to meet someone who could provide stability, someone with whom she could settle down.
When her father died, she took that incredibly hard, and she felt she'd let her dad down. You know, I think her dad had sort of said to her his one regret was not seeing her settled, and she took that as that he was disappointed in her, which it wasn't at all. And no matter what you said to her, that it was more that he was worried about you and he wanted to know that you were sort of safe in a secure relationship and everything else. I think she felt she'd disappointed him, and I think it unsettled her, and it made her lose a bit of confidence, which she hadn't before. And I think she was very focused on trying to settle down. It was like she wanted to make amends for it, rather than it was for her, it was for her dad, you know. And so I think she wanted her next relationship to work. She didn't want a failed relationship again.
Stephen Griffiths seemed like the ideal man for Rana to turn to. His mother had died in similar circumstances to Rana's father. In Stephen, she'd found someone with whom she could share grief.
He told her that his mother had died, and she said, I know what it feels like, you know, my father died in April. And so that really started it off.
I think the first time I met Griffiths was sort of in December 2002. We came over, we were invited here to this house for dinner. My wife and my son and I came over. And we met a very personable, charming man.
Stephen Griffiths polarised people. Some liked him, others didn't. Gemma Faruqui was unsure of him from the start.
I remember meeting him for the first time and thinking he was a little bit strange. But my boyfriend at the time was like, you know, give him a break. He seems really nice, you know, and everything. And so my gut feeling I kind of put to one side and thought, no, okay, I've got to give him a chance.
And Rana too seemed to be giving him a chance. He mentioned that the lease on his flat was up and he wanted to move. Rana said he could stay with her whilst he found somewhere else. However, he soon began behaving oddly.
I can remember she came round to my house one evening and she started to cry, and she said that the previous night she'd gone home and she'd been at my house. She'd come from the horse to my house again, and when she got home he'd said that he'd cooked a meal for her, and it was fish, and she wasn't a fish eater, you know, she wouldn't really have eaten it, and he'd served it up 3 hours before, and you know, why was she so late home? And basically he sat and made her eat it, and she was sort of saying, you know, it was congealed, it was cold, it was awful, and she ate it. I said, you've got to get out, this isn't you.
Unbeknownst to Rana, her family and her friends, Griffith's behaviour was a classic of its type. If experts had known, alarm bells would have rung.
This is a very, very serious sort of incident, even though it may seem almost comic and perhaps related to a friend would say, oh, well, that's a bit silly, isn't it? No, it's actually quite a firm indicator that that sort of situation, that kind of punitive, that manipulation, that threat, that if you don't do as I say, consequences you will not like will arise, may indicate the next time it could be something a heck of a lot more serious.
It was later discovered that Rana was keeping to herself much of what Griffiths was doing to upset her. However, she did become a regular visitor to her mum's.
It came to light that she just didn't want to go back home to him. And I think Hayley, her friend, at one point said, "You've got to tell your mother what's going on."
Claire Bernal and Rana Faruqui, very different but both vulnerable women, had entered into new relationships. One man was beginning to show signs of intense possessiveness, whilst another was behaving bizarrely and aggressively. But nobody could have predicted what would happen next.
He turned to her and said, "If you report me, I will kill you."
Claire Bernal and Rana Faruqui had both begun new relationships with men whose behaviour appeared to friends and family as erratic and possessive. After an intense 3-week relationship, Claire's boyfriend Michael Pech had left London for a planned return to his native Slovakia. Whilst he was away, Claire sought her mother's advice.
Things were happening too quickly. He was declaring love for her, talking about a future. Part of her liked the fact that here was somebody that was prepared to make some sort of commitment. But the other part of her was, it was all happening far too quickly. So it made her feel somewhat uncomfortable.
Obviously, in the case where you have someone who is very rapidly forming a relationship, very rapidly making massive plans for the future on the basis of very little in terms of a relationship where they understand each other and they've learned what the other person's personality is, etc. This rapid pace means that they actually don't particularly care about you. They're fitting you into a life plan which is irrelevant whether it's you or someone else.
Claire had agreed to collect Pech upon his return from Slovakia. The reunion between the two turned ugly.
He went back to her apartment, and after a period of time, she wanted him to leave. She said she was tired, she was getting fed up. She didn't enlarge on it at all, but she really had enough and wanted some peace. So she walked him to the station, which was very close, just round the corner, and he refused to catch the first train. And then after the second train, he refused to catch that. Claire said she was cold and tired, and just wanted to be on her own. And he followed her back to the apartment, and at that point she started to get really very angry. And she went straight upstairs. She took his bag and put it outside. He started to get abusive, and then proceeded to sit outside for a good 2 hours.
Pech's desperation to be near Claire was too much for her to handle. She decided to end the relationship.
The next day, she decided to text him and say that it wasn't working out. That preceded text messages from him. He texted her about 20-30 times that day, and kept saying that he was sorry. He followed her back with a big bouquet of flowers. She was still very angry at the way he'd behaved the day before and left the flowers outside. Again, he stayed on. And then the real stalking and harassment started.
Perhaps, you know, from Claire's point of view, the kind of throwing of flowers, the accolades that he put upon her at this point in time, which is seen also as kind of classic stalking moves, were perhaps him trying to reclaim where he was up to before, where he thought he had a wife, he thought he had a beautiful wife, and this was all going to happen, and his life plan has now been destroyed by someone that he honestly did not have a relationship with. So at essence, he doesn't have the empathy, he doesn't actually care that much about Claire as a person and her rights as a person, and he's very quickly going to cross that line and start to treat her as an object that did not do as she was told.
The type of stalking behaviour suffered by Claire and typified by intensity, control and refusal to accept rejection was precisely that which faced Rana Faruqui. Stephen Griffiths had added another trait common to dangerous stalkers: manipulation of friends and family.
He
he would say things like, "Oh, Rana's so difficult to live with," you know, and I would say, "Oh, I know, she's a madam, you know, she can be really annoying." But that was the Rana we loved. I mean, okay, sometimes you could have swung for her, but that was just her, so we just accepted it.
He will manipulate the situation to make sure that she, who is already quite a vulnerable, agreeable person, is isolated from any other form of support, including her friends and family. He will also maybe try and incorporate the family into his plan. In other words, he uses them in what we call stalking by proxy to assist him in actually making her into what he wants.
The way Griffiths led the conversation, you can see the manipulator at work. But at the time, that was not what we were seeing or what we were thinking of.
He didn't really divide us, but you could see in hindsight that that was probably his plan, so that Rana would be completely on her own, so she would have to rely on him.
Fearful of upsetting her family, Rana Faruqui confided in her friend.
She told me a few things, and there were a couple of times she'd phoned me up and asked me to come over because she'd called the police out. He'd sort of locked her out of the house, and when I got there, the police had sort of escorted him off, got him to pack a bag and leave, sort of thing, and we went back in the house, and there was all blood on the inside of the door. It was a sort of a full wooden door with just a sort of half-moon glass panel at the top, and he'd been sort of punching the glass panel, and it was his blood. But I just said, Rana, this has got to stop. This is weird and everything. He's not right, you know. He's not. It's not going anywhere. He's getting more and more aggressive.
It should have been clear to Rana at this point that this could go anywhere, and as soon as you could get out of this situation, the better, because the future prospects, not just for a relationship, not just for two people coexisting, but quite simply for your own safety, were clearly marked up as being, you know, in jeopardy.
Rana did want out of the relationship. 3 months after it began, she finished it.
When she said, I can't go on any, you know, it's finished, then that was it. We all got together and said, right, he clears out his stuff, you know, we clear out his stuff, he has to come to this house, he doesn't contact you, and everything was put into motion then to sort of help Rana.
We decided that we would get anything that belonged to him out of her house and into my mother's garage, because I had this feeling that if there was anything left that could create a contact, if she wanted to split with him, then it was better to have nothing that could create a contact or a reason for contact, so moving his stuff. We got there and we got into Rana's loft, and Rana herself wasn't aware of how much of his stuff he had moved into her loft while she'd been out at work, and that I found meant that there was more to the situation than just a simple couple breaking up.
In fact, Griffiths was in turmoil.
It started to come apart, and once one aspect comes apart, often there's a knock-on effect and other aspects of their life come apart. So he was someone who was in both disarray and on a decline in life, and probably felt it, and to that degree would be becoming more and more defensive, aggressive, and ready to assert himself in some way and shape or form.
When Claire Bernal's relationship with Michael Pech had come to an end, he exhibited the same manipulative behaviour as Griffiths when confronting Claire's colleagues. He and Claire still worked at Harvey Nichols. She literally couldn't avoid seeing him, and he too was ready to assert himself.
I would get phone calls from Claire, or I'd phone Claire, and she'd say, oh, Michael has been texting me again. Today he was watching me. There were mirrors all around the counter, and he'd stand and watch her. She said he's been talking to my work colleagues, and she was, at this point she was very embarrassed as well, because he was involving other people. His behaviour was becoming increasingly more sinister, was the way that Claire described it. There was an occasion where she was walking down the street, and he ran up to her and called her a stupid little girl, you know you love me. And she ran away, and she was embarrassed. He shouted it, people looked round. As the harassment accelerated, Claire became more and more frightened. Her sleep pattern was affected. She was changing her route home. She was doing everything to get away from him. And she didn't know what to do because she did not want to antagonize him further.
At the point where he begins to pursue Claire, you have a very good exemplar of how stalking can develop from, an abrupt end to a relationship which is inappropriate anyway, but one which has ended badly, in that it will escalate. He will feel more and more isolated and badly treated, and he will actually become more and more aggressive in his advances and more dominant, and see her as someone who has wronged him, as opposed to someone who is quite simply asserting her rights, that she doesn't actually want to see him again.
Everywhere Claire went, she would see Pech. Eventually, she confronted him.
She got on the train and he followed her onto the train, and she said, if you don't leave me alone, I'll have to report you. And he turned to her and said, if you report me, I will kill you.
Pech continued to harass Claire at work and was eventually sacked by Harvey Nichols. The police were called. He was arrested at the store, and he received a restraining order forbidding him from seeing Claire. He ignored it. Pech was arrested a second time, but let out with exactly the same bail conditions as before. He'd contravened his restraining order and was put in prison, but soon he was set free.
Again, he appeared just outside her new flat, and the police came almost immediately, and they arrested him in front of Claire, which was terribly distressing for her. He smiled, a sort of sickly smile. He put his hands up for the handcuffs to go on, and she was terribly shaken up by that. And she phoned me immediately, and that was the time that I really did realise just how determined this man was. He'd spent 8 days in Belmarsh. He was let out with the same bail conditions. And they let him go. There was basically it was just stay away from Claire.
After the arrest, Pech's harassment of Claire stopped, and Claire finally felt as though her life was returning to normal. In fact, Pech had returned home to Slovakia and was preparing himself for the next time he'd see Claire.
Claire was finally able to get on with life again, and things settled back to normal very quickly. I always felt, once the police were involved, that Claire was in safe hands, that she was being protected by the professionals. There was nothing else that could be done. It was all being done. And Claire felt that way too.
Both women seemed to be back in control of their lives. Claire was now protected by the law, and Rana had cut all ties with Griffiths. No one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to strike.
We thought that he would hurt the horse, not Rana, naively not Rana. We thought that's the way he will get to Rana.
And he was going to go and get a gun, and he was going to make sure that the world knew he was important, not them.
Claire Bernal had left behind life in a small town and was now living and working in London. But a relationship had gone badly wrong and had led to the arrest and the placing of a restraining order on her one-time boyfriend, Michael Pech. A court case for harassment was pending. Rana Faruqui ended a difficult relationship with Stephen Griffiths, who she'd met after both had suffered the loss of a parent. But Griffiths didn't want to end things between them and now began stalking Rana and her family.
After she had told him to leave, he left, and then everything started happening. Then he started standing outside her house late at night, early in the morning. He started phoning everybody, emailing.
One of the aspects of stalkers, and which is quite explicit in the case of Stephen and Rana, is that stalkers do tend to have an awful lot of time on their hands, whereas their victims often are fairly busy people with full lives and rich lives, normal lives. Now, the one thing is the conflict that they want to monopolise that time, but two, when they come into a stalking situation, they seem to have all the time in the world to harass, pursue, plot, be in places where they're not supposed to be, whereas the other person doesn't often have sufficient time to get to grips with the situation or do anything about it.
Bizarrely, Griffiths used the time on his hands to put together a PowerPoint presentation explaining why Rana should get back together with him.
He came to the house, brought this PowerPoint presentation and sat there for 3 hours. He was determined we were going to know that he was trying to get Rana back.
The idea of actually coming round to a parent's house and showing a mother a PowerPoint presentation of how things should be within a relationship, it actually does border into the ludicrous. We have someone who appears to be the caricature of someone at the back of a market selling piles of plates, and that is how he is selling their relationship. And to be honest, at this point in time, it should have been fairly clear to all that is exactly how he valued that relationship. It was just goods to be sold, bought and used in his own way, at his own convenience, and had nothing to do with emotion whatsoever.
The family and Rana were becoming increasingly worried about Griffiths' behaviour and contacted the authorities.
She had gone to the police. They had told her to keep a diary. She'd phoned them quite a few times. They'd been round once or twice when he'd been to the house. He had locked her out of the house at one point. So she kept this diary.
Rana and the Faruqui family began a campaign to get rid of Griffiths, and a police officer was assigned to her case.
Oh, she was really pleased. I mean, we would get emails, and I'm trying to think now what she used to put on the emails. It was getting us all together, not against him, but, sort of working to get him out of her life. Operation, well, I don't think I should say it, but it was Operation something, a very rude word.
She called it Operation Bastard, and we'd all come round
We'd be here, wouldn't we?
We'd sit round the table, Simon would be here, Carol, Gemma and myself, and we'd sort of have a plan of action of what we're going to do, and the fight came back into her, and the energy came back into her and the confidence, and I think she realised people loved her, people were on her side, and that this was going to end, he was going to be told quite clearly to go away, and I think she came back to life.
Yeah, she did.
But despite the family's efforts, Griffiths continued to pursue Rana Faruqui. He became increasingly malicious, even cutting the brake lines on her car.
She phoned me up on the Sunday evening. She'd been away competing for the weekend, and she'd got back to the car, and it was quite a long drive down from the farm to the main road, and she said that the brakes felt spongy, and she sort of tested them, and then there was just no brake power there at all. So she pulled over and got a lift home, and she said, the brakes have been cut. She said, I've phoned the police, I've told them, they're coming over. More than anything, she was excited because I think she thought, this is finally going to end. The police now have to take this seriously. He's cut my brake pipes. He will be taken out of my life. They will have to do something about this.
But the officer who was assigned to Rana's case was away.
I think it was handled very, very badly. I think the police didn't take enough care of what Rana was telling them. and it was dismissed. And also they made many mistakes in the fact that Rana's statement about the brakes was given to a policeman who she thought was her policeman. I remember her ringing me up and saying, "I've got a policeman all to myself, Mum, I've just got to ring up and he'll." And it was given to this policeman, and he was away for 2 weeks on holiday. So nothing was done about Rana's cut brakes.
Rana's problem stalker just would not go away. Claire Bernal's stalker did seem to have left the scene. She hadn't heard from Michael Pech for months and was beginning to relax. A holiday seemed a good idea.
It took Claire a little while. She couldn't believe that finally he was out of her life. And as time went on, I could see the old Claire was coming back. I thought it would be rather nice for her 22nd birthday to go to Italy. And from the moment that we arrived, everything just slotted into place. Claire was wherever she went, heads turned. It did Claire's confidence an awful lot of good. We were both very, very excited. The first night we had a meal out, a very special Italian meal, and we talked less like mother and daughter and more as best friends. And we spent an awful lot of that holiday laughing and just having fun. She said, "Mum, when I go back, I'm going to do everything in my power to learn Italian, and I'd like to work over here." She said, "I never knew that there could be another world like this." And that's what she was aiming to do. She was very, very positive. She was looking forward. There was that dark cloud that she would have to possibly appear in court if he pleaded not guilty.
Claire returned to London reinvigorated by her trip to Florence. She was looking forward to a future without Pech.
It was the early hours of the morning, and there was a very loud bang on the door. My partner went downstairs, and I followed him a few minutes later. Someone, I can't remember who said it, said, "It's Claire." And I think the words were, "She's been shot." I can't remember the exact words, but I just knew that it was Pech. And I said, "It's Pech, isn't it?" And they nodded. And then they said, "She's dead."
Michael Pech had returned to Britain from Slovakia with a gun he'd been practicing with on a firing range. He walked into Harvey Nichols and shot Claire in broad daylight before turning the gun on himself.
I was, it wasn't real. It was, the whole thing was like, it was just this bad scene that I was play acting. It wasn't my daughter. It couldn't possibly be. I just felt I was going to wake up. I couldn't even cry. In fact, it was so hard to cry because it couldn't be my daughter.
Claire had dated Pech for 3 weeks, but been haunted by him for nearly a year. Then he killed her. Rana Faruqui's stalker, Stephen Griffiths, exhibited the same warning signs as Pech, which meant Rana was in grave danger.
They tell you the first one is the heart, and the body goes into trauma. But I'll always wonder.
Claire Bernal had been killed by a possessive stalker. Rana Faruqui, still overcoming the death of her father, had begun a relationship with another person recently bereaved. Stephen Griffiths had lost his mother. Within 3 months, he'd convinced Rana that he should move in with her. But Griffiths' behaviour became increasingly erratic and bullying. He tried to control everything in Rana's life, from when she ate to whom she kept as friends. Rana told him to leave. She and her brother then discovered he'd moved all of his belongings into her attic whilst Rana had been at work. Reluctantly, Griffiths agreed to move out, but he then began a relentless stalking campaign, following her, photographing her, even bizarrely preparing a PowerPoint demonstration to convince Rana and her family that the two belonged together. After still further rejection, his campaign turned vicious. He cut the brake pipes to her car. Despite having a policeman assigned to her case, Griffiths went unpunished. The officer in question was on holiday when the incident took place. Rana had managed to stop her car before a serious accident could happen, but Griffiths was not to be denied. One day, as she prepared to muck out the stable of her horse Toby, Griffiths struck.
Apparently he walked across the field towards her, and she got on the phone to the police, and he saw her on the phone, and she was saying, Stephen, go away, go away. And that's when he stabbed her. The police got to her 8 minutes after her phone call, and she was dead. I've read his statements, and he said it wasn't a frenzied attack, but it was 16 times. 11 o'clock that night, the doorbell kept ringing, and I was in bed. Gemma had gone to a party in Oxford, and I thought it was Stephen Griffiths, and I thought, at this time of night, no way am I opening the door to him.
The phone went, which I thought was a bit strange, because it was about 11 o'clock at night by this time. My wife answered it, and she sounded a bit strange as she was walking up the stairs with the phone, and she came in to the bedroom and said, it's the police. The police wouldn't tell me anything. They just said, we need you to come out. How long will it take you to get to your mother's house?
I was out in Oxford for a friend's birthday, and I got a text. I was in a club. I didn't really know where I was because I don't know Oxford. And I got a text from my brother saying, call me now. And so I went outside to call him, and he was like, where are you? And I had to get my friend to explain where we were and stuff. And he said, someone's coming to pick you up now.
My son came over. In the meantime, I kept saying, where is she? How did it happen? He kept telling me he didn't know.
The police said, who are you? I said, Simon, you rang me and let me into the house. And Mum just got up and she said, and I remember this because she didn't use names or anything, she just said, he's killed her. And that was it.
The lady went upstairs with me. They said they were moving us. Could I pack a bag? I said my daughter was in Oxford. They said they'd go over and pick her up. I said, don't tell her, just tell her her sister's hurt.
The police took us to this hotel in Slough, and I walked through the doors, and my brother just said, she's been murdered. And then I remember just collapsing.
I heard the doorbell go, and I didn't even want to open the door because I knew from that second, actually. And then I opened the front door, and when Rana's father had died, she left the hospital and came over to see me. Mm. And when I'd opened the front door, she was stood in a corner and she looked really little. And I opened the front door and Gemma was stood in exactly the same place, looking really little. And I thought, he's killed her. And I thought, how could I not have realised the danger she was in if I know he's killed her? Mm. Because I never for 1 minute thought he'd hurt her. I never thought there was a problem. I thought, he's killed her. And then I thought, I should have protected her more, you know. I'd asked her to move in with me, and I'd asked her to be sensible about going to the farm and to sort of keep a low key and everything else. But I still don't think I believed he was capable of doing that. And yet the minute I opened the door, even before I opened the door, I knew what he'd done. And I thought, how could we know that and yet not see the risk before?
My first reaction was, what an arrogant thing to do. Who the hell is he to decide who lives and dies?
I just feel cheated that I've lost such a precious sister and friend.
Rana Faruqui had been involved with Griffiths for just a few months. For over a year after, he had stalked and tormented her, making her life a misery. Claire Bernal's killer had turned a gun on himself. Griffiths is now serving a life sentence. In both cases, the police were aware of the dangers that the women were in. Michael Pech was awaiting a trial for harassing Claire, whilst Rana had a police officer assigned to her case to help repel Griffiths' unwanted attentions. Still, the justice system could not prevent the murders at the hands of stalkers of Claire Bernal and Rana Faruqui.
I met basically two types of officer. I met some very professional, intelligent, competent officers after Rana was killed. The frontline troops, as it were, are inexperienced, poorly trained and lacking in judgment.
They didn't know that he'd left the country and that he'd applied for a gun licence, retrained in arms, and managed to smuggle a gun back into the country, a legal gun at that.
The police are brought in almost as a last resort, and although this sounds like the cavalry arriving, unfortunately with the police sometimes problems arise because it is a very limited, one-dimensional support system which focuses on the perpetrator, tends to ignore the victim except for reassurance. It gives false reassurance to the entire situation, and it also actually does not put a real barrier between stalker and victim. It puts a synthetic legal barrier which takes time to put in place.
Police say that they have learned lessons from the failure to keep safe two young women from killer stalkers, so that other victims will be better protected. But for those left behind, that is scant consolation.
Every day I miss her, you know. I'll wake up in the morning and I'll wake up at night and it's just emptiness. And you know, I'm surrounded by loving people, you know, friends and family, but there's always that pain in the pit of your stomach, and the only people that really understand are the people that have lost their child.
The joy of seeing her riding. I suppose those are the memories of her. Oh, I miss her. Every single day, I talk to her. I walk across the field with the horse and talk to him. I never thought at my age I'd be getting up in the morning and mucking out, but it's for Rana. It's all for Rana. It's all I can do for her. I can do nothing else for her.
He kept me sane through it all. I suppose this is the grandchild I never have from Rana. Stephen Griffiths did me out of all of that.
I can't hug her when she's unhappy. I can't kiss it better for her anymore. It's she's gone.
There's been a succession of strange things that have given us the strength, not only myself but my family and Claire's friends, the strength to face another day. Just when things seem at their darkest, then something happens that you think, she's there, She's watching over us, and we will be together one day. I'm absolutely convinced of it.
She's still very much with me, and we talk about her a great deal as a family, without really making her a saint or anything. For saint, far from saint, but she is still very much part of the family.